Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Ad Astra Kansas Money Talks podcast. I'm Joe Blubaugh, joined by Mark Johnson of Bob Schwartz Financial. Bob, who is normally with us, is not available today, so we're going to try to undergo this venture with just the two of us. And if you would like to learn more about Bob Schwartz Financial, you can go to bobschwartzfinancial.com. They have offices in Victoria, Kansas, as well as Silver Lake, Kansas. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and give us a rating, if you would, on your favorite podcast provider. And with that, let's talk about what our subject is today. We're going to talk about something that everybody goes through, but a lot of times we don't think about the financial impacts, and that's life transitions. And there's a lot of those, and we're going to talk about all of them, but we're talking about having children, buying a house, retiring, maybe a career change. All of these things are transitions that we all go through in life, but sometimes we don't think about the financial impact that might have, good and bad, on your retirement savings as well. So let's start out with maybe the $250,000 question. And if you're wondering where I got that number, there was a study done once that said the average child cost an American family about $250,000. And I think that number might be getting a little bit old, so it might even be more than that nowadays. But, you know, obviously when we think about having children, you have a couple, I have three. It's a part of our life that is so fulfilling. It's the whole reason we're here, is to have children. But we don't think necessarily about the financial impact of having a child. And it's always best to have a plan when we start thinking about starting our family.
Yeah, exactly. That $250,000 doesn't include college either. And that's another thing that I think people who see that number like, wow. And then you add that's not college included. It's even almost a scarier number. But it's nothing to be, I guess, scared of, but you do need to make sure you're aware. As you go through this as a major transition, one thing that, as I was a new parent, I don't think I understood how much some of the costs would be, especially when it comes to childcare, and how big of an impact that can be on your family budget.
Yeah. So childcare is probably that first big sticker shock when if you're a two household working families, childcare almost becomes a must, or a single parent, it doesn't really matter. There's almost always childcare costs involved, and it can be a really big number. And then when you start having multiple children, it just exponentially becomes a bigger number. Now you start to get some breaks as they start into the school. If you go to a public school, you're going to get some of those breaks. If you go to a private school, you maybe replace the child care with tuition costs. But definitely something to think about. But another thing that people maybe don't think about is insurance costs.
Yeah. You need to when you have a new kid, anytime you need to update your insurance, make sure all your beneficiaries are in order with all of any sort of account, your insurance, your brokerage account, whatever it is. But you kind of have to go through those steps just to make sure that everything's in order with your new child. And I'm sure after you get to 3 or 4 or whatever that number is for your family, that kind of just becomes automatic. But the first child, I think a lot of people don't realize they have to do these certain things.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of insurance, the one recent sticker shock that we had was we now have 2 teenage drivers.
Oh, yeah.
And our youngest just turned 16, which is at least in Kansas, that's when they start getting charged for auto insurance. And I'll never forget when our oldest was turning 16, I called my insurance agent, said, hey, we got one turning 16, need to add him to the insurance. And they said, great, are you setting down? And I'm like, huh? Well, it's a little bit of a sticker shock when you see how much insurance costs for a teenage driver, and wow, they were not kidding. So something I hadn't thought about, but it definitely had an impact on our budget, which actually brings us to another good point. When we talk about having a family, we've talked about many times in this podcast how important a budget is.
Yeah.
But when you have a family and your family's growing, or you're going through maybe, once again, maybe you got a child that's turning 16 and is now going to be included in your insurance cost, those budgets not only need to be there, but they need to be updated regularly.
Yeah. And there's going to be new costs, there's going to be changes. It's going to be very fluid. You talked about with your insurance, those can be derailers if you're not ready for those things. If you don't have an emergency fund set aside to where you're able to pull money from, if something happens, if you don't have a little extra cash in savings to adjust your budget, those are all things that can happen if you aren't prepared with your budget to begin with, I guess.
Yeah. And you bring up emergency fund, and it's something that maybe we don't think about with a family, but if you're married, and it's you and your spouse, it's probably top of mind. Hey, if something were to happen to me, something were to happen to my spouse, maybe we lost a job, maybe we had a layoff, God forbid something would happen health-wise to one. Emergency fund is pretty common there. But what you maybe don't think about is when you start having children, and now you've got another member of the family, and if that child should become ill, and that makes you, have to maybe lay back from work for a while, those emergency funds really become even more important as your family grows.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That on top of the other thing I'd add to make sure that, when you have a child, to make sure you update your estate planning, make sure your will's updated, make sure that they're involved in all of the legal documents that you have in place for your family.
Okay. You mentioned college savings, and that $250,000 figure that we threw out didn't include college. One of the things that can really become important is maybe starting to save for college and saving early.
Yeah. There's, other parents do things different ways. There's, the most popular thing I would say, recently is using 529 plans, and watching that money grow and be withdrawn tax-free is pretty awesome when you get there. If you start early enough, if you've had the 529 for at least 15 years, then you get to roll that over into a Roth for whatever they don't use in college. If you use it all, great, that's what it's there for. But if you don't, your child gets a benefit from that, and that's pretty amazing. 529's the other thing that I think are really popular is uniform transfer to minors. So you're just have a regular brokerage account, but instead of it being earhold for education, you don't get necessarily the tax write-offs, but when they turn 21, they're going to get this gift of the money that you've been putting away. And some people use that for college, but for the most part, those are people that just want their kids to have a head start pretty much. Maybe they use that for college. Maybe they just use it as a gift, right? When they graduate college.
Oh, very good. You mentioned it, but one other, and I just want to emphasize, one of the reasons why it's so good to start early, in addition to the compound interest, but start early on a 529 is that 15-year rule that the IRS has put in place. Up until a couple of years ago, you couldn't do that. You couldn't convert a 529, which is specifically for education cost, to a Roth IRA, which is specifically for retirement. Now you can, but in order to make sure that people weren't abusing it, they put that 15-year rule in. So start early, get all that compound interest working for you, but also, if you are lucky enough that your child maybe gets scholarships or some other reason that they don't end up needing to spend that 529, it's a great head start for retirement savings as well.
It's also a great thing, or 529s are also great. Let's say if you have a family that you have 3 or 4 kids and they all have 529s, and the first one didn't need all his, and you can roll that back to your, you can use that for the other kids.
You can change the beneficiary.
Yeah, change those so that, all your kids are pretty much covered. Hopefully, maybe one doesn't get as many scholarships, maybe one gets a full ride for athletics, there's just things that are going to happen. So, it's going to be nice to have that safety net of those multiple 529 accounts for sure.
Makes sense. Let's move on to another life transition that most of us go through, and that's buying a house. And, over the last 5 years, housing prices have really skyrocketed. And it's always been, it's one of the largest financial transactions most Americans make is buying a house. So it's always been a big thing. And I think people think about it. But I think over the last 4 to 5 years, it has become exponentially a bigger impact on our budgets because housing prices have increased so much. We've talked about it on this program before. I have a real estate license. I do real estate work. And, I always tell my clients, you have to find balance when you're shopping for a home. You can't let it be a 100% emotional purchase because you have to think about the budget. Yep. But at the same time, I think it's just as bad to go completely the other way and only look at buying a house as a financial transaction because then you miss some of the other things that are so critically important to your family. So there's a balance there of between the emotional and the financial. But regardless of where you lie maybe within that spectrum, one of the things you have to pay attention to is the cost of the house yep. and the impact on your monthly budget.
Yep. Yeah, and I'd say one of the things I didn't necessarily understand when I was going through this transition myself, or me and my wife were handling this, was, what type of loan should we get? How much should we put down? And there's some people that don't, there's some people that their first time buying a house, they don't have 20% to put down, especially in today's, market where houses are pretty expensive. It might be pretty hard to get 20% down for even a small home for some people. So I think that's one struggle to make sure that you're talking to your real estate professional, understanding like the difference, your real estate or your financial professional, whoever you're working with, but to understand the different types of loans and the impact that will have on your budget. Right.
And you've mentioned it, down payments. Down payment, if you can put more down, you're going to have less monthly costs. The insurance rate or the interest rates right now are kind of high compared to what we've been used to over the last 20 years. So the more that you're borrowing, the more you're going to pay in monthly interest. And because of that power of compound interest that we always want working for us, and when you're buying a house, it's just the opposite. It's working against you. And it's pretty drastic, the amount of buying power you lose between the 3 to 3.5% interest rates that we had grown accustomed to the approximate 7% that people are paying now. Yeah. You really have lost some buying power there. But it's so important to also look beyond the just what your principal and interest, your P&I. You've got to look at what's the real estate taxes, how much is insurance, and then the thing that some people don't think about is the maintenance. Yep. So another thing I always like to tell my clients, and I steal this from Dave Ramsey because I think it's very accurate, is a home is meant to be a blessing, not a curse. And if you get in over your head on a home and so much of your budget is going to principal and interest and taxes and insurance, trust me, there will be maintenance issues that will come up. Yep. And it will sink you financially, or it can for sure.
Yeah, and that's what just basic financial planning of, do you have an emergency fund? You should not be dipping into that to buy your home, because then you're just becoming house poor. And as soon as that first thing happens, which something will happen, in the first year or two, something's going to happen in your house, your dog's going to break something, or some appliance is going to need to be replaced. If you don't have the money for that right then all of a sudden you're putting on credit cards, and we start down a path of debt that we really would like to stay away from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it obviously varies on the home, so you don't want to make a blanket statement, but I would say 1 to 4% of your home's value per year you need to kind of set aside for maintenance issues. Yeah. Their homes are expensive to maintain, and there are a lot of big ticket items that can pop up without notice, a new HVAC system, a new roof, things like that. So you definitely need to make sure that you're taking that into consideration as well.
And with the life transition thing, if you're buying your first home, or if you're someone that's talking to a family member about buying their first home, I think one of the best advice my dad gave me was be willing to buy a house that you can afford, that you can put your own sweat equity into. And he's like, you can learn anything from YouTube now. And I do believe that. And, doing pretty much all the work on our house, I felt like, besides maybe a couple of the things that were done by professionals, like, I'm not an electrician, I'm not going to try to be, but you can do a lot cosmetically to your home that can
increases the value.
by
Absolutely.
and those can be good investments. But don't go and try to build a house unless I feel like that is something. I'm 31, and I feel like everyone my age thinks they need to build a $500,000 house as soon as they, for their first house or maybe even their second house, whatever. But like, that's what it's got to be. I don't necessarily think that's the right answer for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. But it really comes down to what we've already said. Make a budget, stick to your budget. And one last thing on budgeting. So when you're saving for a down payment, you want to stay away from PMI if you can help it. And if you don't mortgage, it's a mortgage insurance. If you don't come up with, usually it's 20% of the cost of the home as a down payment, then usually your mortgage lender is going to ask you to take out an insurance policy for them that you pay for. Yeah. So it's literally burning money. I mean, it's just throwing money away. But when you are taking into consideration your down payment, don't forget about closing costs. And then don't forget about repairs. Sometimes there are repairs that have to happen as part of the closing process so that the mortgage lender is good with that house still. If you've got a broken sewer line, the mortgage lender feels that house is not livable, and they're not going to lend money to somebody for a house that's unlivable. So those are repairs that have to be done before that house can close. So always take all those things into consideration. Don't get it so close that you just have your down payment. You need to make sure you have some closing cost and a little extra in case there's some repairs that pop up.
Exactly.
Yep. So one of the ways that you can maybe afford a better house is maybe if you had a better job or a better paying job. Yeah. So another one of those life transitions is changing jobs. Now, changing jobs doesn't always mean more money. And I think it goes beyond saying we're a financial podcast, so we focus on money, but there is so much more to a job than just the money part of it. Yeah. It's money, it's benefits, it's the work-life balance, it's all of those things that play a part in it. If you, from experience, you blink and your children are out the door. And, it's like one day you've got a bouncing new baby, and it feels like a couple days later they're graduating from high school and off to college. That 20-ish year time frame is so important to be a part of. And if you're in a job that you can't go to ball games or you can't go to music recitals, you've got to decide what's the most important: providing for the family, being for the family, and maybe trying to find a job that does both. Yeah,
exactly. There's a lot. Me personally, I feel like I just got done going through a job transition, a year ago now, which was crazy, but it's stressful to the family. It's stressful for a lot of people on you, because when you're comfortable with something, especially if you've done something for like 10 years or so, like I had, and there's people that change jobs when 20 years in, whatever it is, it can be nervous because you're doing something new. But when you make that decision, you need to be looking at the whole package. Don't just look at the pay. Look at the benefits. Look at the time, the commute, all those little things that come into this change, this important change for you and your family, because it really should be a family decision when it really comes down to it. If you think there's going to be some sort of gap in your work time, and you're about to take this new job, you need to make sure you're budgeting for 3 to 6 months, whatever that is, gap time between your old job and your new job. The other thing I'd look at is your retirement. What do they have at your new workplace? Do they have the same? Do they have a 401k? Do they have a Roth 401k? Do they have a simple plan? Can my existing 401k be rolled over into my new one? Those are all things that matter.
You mentioned the 3 to 6 months of expenses or whatever you feel like you need for the job. One thing that I always concern myself with as I've made a couple of career changes is, what if I don't like? Then, maybe I've been in a very stable environment and I'm making a move because a spouse took a different job and we were changing cities. Whatever it might be, what happens if I get to my new employer and it's just not working out? So once again, I think it is very smart to have a backup plan with your budget just in case you need to step away from that as well. This is more of a personal anecdote, but I spent 30 years total in the military, and then when I transitioned out of that, it took me a while to, not just financially, but just stable myself. Mm-hmm. It was such a big change, and that's something else I think people should consider when we talk about these lifestyle changes or transitions, is make sure that you have a plan. Admittedly, I did not have a strong plan, and it took me a while to transition. And I think that's something that is really important for people as well.
Yeah. The other thing I would bring up is, let's say you are taking a job that you're going to get paid $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more all of a sudden. One of the easiest things to do is let that creep up, like that lifestyle creep, just come right at you real fast. And so make sure that you have your budget. Make sure that you have an idea about this new money. Like, should I change how much I'm investing? Should I change, have a goal with that new money, because all of a sudden you're going to see maybe a couple $1,000s more in your bank account each month. And the first thing is, okay, I'm just going to spend this. And all of a sudden you took this new job to make more money, to build more wealth for retirement, all that good stuff, but you're just spending it all. And you start living a lifestyle that is maybe not feasible in the long run. So you need to make sure to look at that when you are changing, especially when you're moving up. When you're moving down, obviously you're going to have to do a little budget pinching,
Right.
You're going to have to change the budget in another way, the not so fun way.
Well, and let's talk about that. It's a perfect transition to another one of those lifestyle transitions, and that's retirement. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk, obviously, so much of what we talk about on this podcast is saving for retirement. Sometimes when it gets here, we're not ready for it. Mm-hmm. One of the things, you kind of mentioned it, is changing jobs doesn't always mean a better job or a higher paying job. Better, I don't want to say better, higher paying job. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a transition between your career and retirement, and maybe it's part-time work, or maybe it's taking a leave of absence just to kind of absorb what retirement will be like, so that way you can better prepare for it as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I was just reading a book, it's called How to Retire, and one strategy that the author talked about was, maybe you should cut back working, like maybe 5 years going into retirement, you cut back working a little bit each year until, that last year you're working like purely half-time or even less. You just kind of get used to the retirement instead of just going cold turkey, I'm done with work, what do I do now with all this time, And I think that's some incredible advice for people, especially people that are like, for example, like Joe, who was in the military, someone that's, you're going, you're go.
Very structured.
Yeah, very structured. Or you're someone that's been in the office for 35 years and you've been working at your cubicle and you do your thing. All of a sudden that's just done. I think that can be hard for some people.
I know firsthand it can be hard for some people.
Yeah.
So it's I've also read about that strategy, and it is something that I think people might want to consider. And that strategy helps in a couple of different ways. Obviously, the financial piece of it, because maybe you're not going from a full-time job to no job, You might have some part-time income in there that lets you transition budget-wise, but also from a lifestyle perspective. What I found is I had way too much time on my hands, and I wasn't using it effectively, and just my own personal psyche, when I didn't use it effectively, it didn't leave me in the best state of mind. I just kind of felt like sometimes I wasted days, and I lamented on that, and so I needed to get back to being busy.
The other thing that goes along with, we're talking about phasing out of your career into retirement. The other part I talk about is phasing in, getting used to the fact that you're going to start pulling money, that you're going to start pulling money from your accounts, and instead of being a net saver, you're being a net, possibly more of a net not spender. Sorry, I can't talk. But that's really hard, especially for people that have plowed money into their retirements for 35 years and they love seeing that number go up. It is hard for some people as they transition in this period where the beginning part, your retirement's it's kind of like a weird roller coaster where at the very beginning you spend a lot of money as you go do the things you want to go do that you've been planning with you and your spouse, whoever it is. That after we retire, we're going to go do this, and this, and you spend.
Commonly referred to as the go-go years.
Yes, and then all of a sudden that kind of evens out, and maybe you do start being a net saver again, just from your
older,
Social Security.
Just can't quite go as many times as you used to, so you're not spending as much.
Yeah, and so all of a sudden, your equity portfolios are working for you. You're getting dividend payouts. Maybe you are net saving again, which is awesome. But all of a sudden, again, at the end of our life, we hit the uphill again, and we go very much into having to pull quite a bit of money near the end of our life, usually as we pay for medical expenses. Yeah. So I think just getting used to that whole mindset of spending too in retirement and that transition can be really tough for people, and it might be a good way to ease into it like we've talked about.
Right. And so, you have to. I can't emphasize this enough. You have to have a plan going into retirement. You just do. And that plan is not only a budget, because that's important, but you can't set a budget until you know what your number is.
Exactly.
You've got to know what your number is. And this is where Bob and Mark can really help, or a financial professional can really help, because it's one thing to save money throughout your lifetime. It is another thing to be able to retire, but not just retire with confidence, knowing that you're taken care of.
Yep.
And the way to do that is you got to know what your number is. So you got to look at your expenses. You got to look at how much do I have? How much can that generate per year in residual income? And what is the amount that I need per year to where I can live comfortably but not completely 100% deplete my accounts?
Yeah, and I think that's part of being a financial advisor, like a hard part of our job. I wouldn't say a hard part, but a hard conversations that we have to have sometimes with people is we do know our client, like we do know clients' plans, and we do know like when we see money getting pulled, and we know we're not hitting those numbers that we need to, and you have to have those hard conversations, and that's an important, like I said, kind of difficult task sometimes, but a very important task to have someone that's holding you accountable to those numbers. It's like, hey, you're going to run out of money by the time you're 85 if you do this, keep doing this same thing for the next 3 years. If you have, that's a really, like I keep saying, a really, really key thing to having a financial professional in your life to keep you accountable to your goals, but also make sure sometimes you're spending and you're like, I'm good. I'm looking at my account. It looks great. But you don't have the whole picture in mind. Yep. We're trying to keep your whole picture. We have the whole, your last 10 years, we believe we're going to spend more. We also know that you have goals. You have a legacy goals that you want to, give money back to your family. And right now, your family might be paying for a little bit at the end of your life. We have to keep all those things in mind for our clients. And
I personally feel that just as important is the other conversation that you can have with a client, and that is, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you have more money than you need. Go have fun. Go enjoy your retirement, because that's the other thing. If people don't have a plan, even if they have enough money, they might not spend what they can spend, and they might be frugal and not enjoy life to the fullest because they're too worried about running out of money.
Yeah, and there's people like that you're exactly right, Joe, that were just like, hey, you're good, and just making sure we're confirming that you are okay. Go enjoy retirement. Gift some money to your kids each year if you don't want to go travel and whatever, but you want to make sure your kids are happy. Well, why don't you give them money and go on a trip with them? Do things. There's other things that you can do if you don't want to be you're not adventurers or whatever it is, but there's a way to enjoy your money in retirement still, if you've created that plan. So you're exactly right. The other thing I would say, when you're looking at your retirement, like you want to think about, some people get really, really nervous and they take all their money from their 401ks that have been growing and growing and growing and done a great job, whatever, and they take all of it and they hit 60 and they just throw it all in bonds, or they throw it all into money market and or CD, and they're like, we're good. And we don't want to see that ever go down again. One thing we got to make sure we're really careful of in retirement is inflation, and bonds, CDs, are not going to keep pace with inflation like being involved in equity and being involved in the equity market, even if that's indexing, whatever that is. But being involved in the full potential of the stock market is what is going to keep your accounts moving upwards,
right,
and not just down until the very end. So just being engaged, having someone like a financial professional to talk to, being engaged in the equity market. There is going to be times where your money fluctuates. That is the price to pay. But it is a good price to pay when you look at the long-term trend, the long-term success of the United States equity market.
Yeah. Yep. And I'll just clarify, when you're saying being involved in, being, exposed to, you're not saying 100% of the money. In fact, just the opposite. Yep. You want a large chunk of that to continue to grow at those higher levels, but you always have a plan for when those markets are down. Hey, we've got a different way to fund our lifestyle there. It is something that I do think is critically important. Inflation is a lot of times we don't think about it, and inflation and taxes are two of the biggest issues that you could face in retirement that maybe people don't think about.
Yeah, I was reading a book, a financial book it came out in like 2002 or something, and they were talking about this same issue that we're talking about right now, and they're talking about inflation, and they're talking about the average price of the home being like $105,000 or something like that. And I'm just like, yeah, I think those numbers in 25 years have changed quite a bit already. Yeah. I can't imagine, there was some other examples that they gave that just showed, I'm like, man, in 25 years, I can't imagine in 25 more years what it's going to cost to retire. What's it going to cost to keep up with inflation? So yeah.
Lots of lifestyle transitions for sure. These aren't all of them, but they're kind of the main ones. Having a family, buying a house, retirement, changing careers, all of them you need to look at from a lot of different perspectives, but not the least of which is the financial perspective as well. So great topic. Mark, thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully next week we'll have Bob back, and we miss Bob's stories. I like Bob's stories he gets to tell. So hopefully you will also join us for our next episode. Give us a like or a thumbs up on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. And once again, if you would like more information of how Mark or Bob could help you, you can go out to bobschwartzfinancial.com. They've got all their contact information in there. If you live in Kansas, or maybe not even live in Kansas, and you feel like these gentlemen could help you out, give them a call, shoot them an email. And once again, they have offices in Victoria, Kansas, and Silver Lake, Kansas. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.